Section 27 is entitled Factoring Trinomials whose leading coefficient is 1. We'll talk about what leading coefficient means in a moment. You have x plus a, you multiply by x times b. What do you get? Well, you get x times x, which is x squared. You also get positive bx. You also get positive ax. And you also get plus ab. Now you can combine the x's. You have b of them and you're adding a of them. Well, you have the x squared and the ab. The question is how many x's you have. Well, like I said, you have b and you're adding a. You have b plus a or a plus b. That is x plus a times x plus b is just what we have on the last line. That line is x plus a plus bx's plus ab. Now, the leading coefficient is the coefficient of the highest power of x. You have x to the 1, you have x squared. X squared, 2, the power 2 is the largest. The coefficient is the number that x squared is being multiplied by or is understood to be multiplied by. In this case, it's being multiplied by 1. The leading coefficient is 1. Now, if you notice, the number in front of x is the sum of these two numbers. A plus b is a plus b. And you know what? The product of these two numbers is the constant. So we know since they're both x's, you're going to get x squared. How many x's you have? Add those two numbers. A plus b is plus a plus b. Those are the number of x's. Multiply the two constants, positive a, positive b. That's the constant. For example, if you had x plus 4 and you multiply by x plus 5, we're going to get x squared. How many x's we have? Add those two numbers. Get 9 x's. Multiply those two numbers. Get positive 20. If you have x minus 7 and you multiply it by x plus 5, you're going to get x squared. How many x's you have? Add those two numbers. Get negative 2 x's. Multiply these two numbers. Get negative 35. But the title of this section, so what we're getting is a trinomial. Tri means 3. Getting 3 terms. But the instructions or heading of this section is factoring trinomials, not multiplying out and getting trinomials. It's factoring trinomials. So the thing is we really want to go the other way. You should ask yourself, how do we figure out what numbers go here and here? That is, you're just given x squared minus 2x minus 35. And you know, since it's x squared, it's going to be x followed by a number times x followed by another number. And the two numbers should multiply out to the constant, but add up to the number in front of x's. The two numbers I put here, they should multiply out to negative 35 and add up to negative 2. Well, you know, negative 7 and 5, positive 5 do that. Write down all numbers that multiply out to negative 35. 1 and negative 35, 2 doesn't go in, 3 doesn't go in, 4 doesn't go in, 5 goes into negative 35, negative 7 times. And what do you know? They add up to negative 2. That is why I put positive 5 and negative 7 next to the x's. And I factored it. That one is done. The bottom one, let's do the bottom one. since it's understood to be 1x squared, when I factor it, it'll be x followed by number times x followed by another number. And the two numbers should multiply out to 20, but add up to 9. The numbers that I know that multiply out to 20 are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. And those add up to 9. So I write plus 4 and plus 5. You need to know the game. You want two numbers to put next to the x's that add up to the value of it in front of the x and multiply out to the constant. For example, if you have x squared minus 6x plus 8. Since it's x squared and not 3x squared or negative x squared, we know it's going to look like this. We want two numbers that multiply out to 8. Positive 8. That means the numbers are either going to be both positive or they're going to be both negative. But we want the sum to be negative 6. You can't add two positive numbers and get a negative. You're going to get a positive. And if you add two negative numbers, you get a negative. So the two numbers have to be negative. That way, when I multiply the negative by a negative, I'll have a chance of getting positive 8. And when I add the two negative numbers, I'll have a chance to get negative 6. At least I'm getting the sign correct. The numbers that multiply out to 8, let's do it here. With only negative numbers. Negative 1 and negative 8. 2 goes in to 8, so negative 2 does as well. Negative 3 does not. Negative 4 does, but I already wrote negative 4. And I'm just repeating myself now. So I look at these two and I say they add up to negative 9, which is not good. Oh wow, those add up to negative 6. Just what I wanted, negative 6. So negative 2 and negative 4 are the two numbers that go next to x's, and we factor it and we're done. X squared plus x minus 30. Well, you should understand it's 1x. And since it's x squared in front, and it's going to be that way for the whole section because the leading coefficient is supposed to be 1, I want two numbers that multiply out to 30 but add up to 1. And if the product is supposed to be negative 30, negative, that means the signs are different. You can't multiply a negative and a negative and get negative. You can't multiply a positive and a positive and get a negative. The signs have to be different. Okay, so the signs are different. Fair enough. But now the sum should be positive 1. When the signs are different, when you have a negative number and you're adding a positive number, notice the signs are different. Which sign do you keep? The answer. You keep the sign of the larger number. And if you want the sum to be positive, the larger number should be plus. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. I want to write down numbers that multiply out to 30, but of the two numbers, the larger one will be positive. 1 and 30, I'll let the smaller number be negative. Negative 2 and 15. Negative 3 and 10. Negative 5 and 6. There you go. They add up to 1. These add up to 29. These add up to 13. These add up to 7. Those add up to 1. So negative 5 and plus 6 go next to the x. You have to know your times table. You have to know what numbers, the factors of 30. You have to know what numbers go into 30. I mean, when somebody asks me what numbers go into 30, I just don't know them. I ask myself, like, can I multiply 1 by something to go into 30? Yes. So those are two numbers. 2 times 15 is 30. 3 times 10. 4, no. Yeah. 5 times 6. are the factors of 30. In fact, in this case, I would have written them side by side. 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. In fact, I did write them side by side. And I looked, so you have to know the factors. You have to learn your times table. I don't know why students would want to take a class again because they failed it a second time. Why somebody would want to study for 5 hours when they can study for 2 hours. Why somebody would want to study for 5 hours when you can study for 2 hours and ending up getting a lower grade studying for the 5 hours than the 2 hours. That is mind-boggling to me. The only thing I can think of is you love math and you want to spend more time with it. Because otherwise you would learn your times table so you wouldn't have to spend as much time on your math. X squared, say minus 7x plus 10. X followed by a number, x followed by possibly a different number. The product should be positive 10. That means the signs are both the same, but they should add up to negatives. That means the signs are both negative. Numbers that multiply out to 10, and both numbers are negative, are negative 1 and negative 10, negative 2 and negative 5, 3 doesn't go into 10, 4 doesn't go into 10, negative 5 does go into 10, but I already have it. I already have it. Once you repeat yourself, you can stop. These add up to negative 11. There we go. They add up to negative 7. Negative 2, negative 5. We backed it. We're done. Okay, let's do some more. Suppose you have x squared minus 6x minus 16 is 0. Now there might be problems, and I'm not saying this is one of them, where for what we know at this point it's not factorable. Alright, so I didn't mean to say equals 0. So we know what equals x followed by a number times x followed by a number. And the two numbers should multiply out to negative 16. That means the signs are different. And the sum should be negative 6. That means the larger number should be negative. Well, 16, or negative 16. You have 1 and 16. The larger number should be negative. You have 2 and negative 8. I'll stop right there. They add up to negative 6. That tells me to put plus 2 here, and the minus 8 there, and I say that was not bad. That problem is now done. Find two numbers that multiply out to negative 16 and add up to negative 6. Okay. Now, suppose you were asked to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6. And we've already done this one. So, there's a reason we're doing it again. Two numbers that add up, multiply out to 6, that add up to 5 are 2 and 3. So let's modify this problem a little bit. Suppose next to the x, I put anything, say t. And then next to the constant, whatever I put here, I square it, and I put it there. If somebody asked me to factor this, I would remove the t and make sure that whatever that is, t squared is by the constant. I would remove it. Of course, once I remove it, I would get this. And when I factored that, I would get this. Now, the answer to our problem, x squared plus 5xt plus 6t squared, is very similar to the factoring above. What what does that say? T. You're done. Okay, we'll do a couple of more. I understand that was somewhat quick. And you really should multiply it out. Make sure that I'm not making this stuff up. I want you to see here, it really works. Suppose you had x squared plus 8x t cubed plus 12 t to the 6th. And you're being asked to factor this. And since it's x squared, you know it's x followed by something times x followed by something else. Now, that's t cubed. That's kind of unusual. I mean, I thought it should only have x's. If next to the x term, or in the x term, you have, say, t cubed. Now, if you take t cubed and you square it, remember you multiply the powers, you get t to the 6th. And that's part of the constant. That's part of the constant. Okay? Since what's being squared by the x is what's on by the constant. Here's the x. Here's that extra piece by the x. And when you square it, you see it by the constant. What you're allowed to do is remove it from the whole equation. Remove all the t's. That is just factor x squared plus 8x plus 12. And since it's x squared, it's x followed by a number times x followed by a number. Two numbers that multiply up to 12 and add up to 6, you should know. Excuse me, add up to 8. Two numbers that multiply up to 12 and add up to 8, that's 6 and 2. Okay. So let me not write 6 and 6, let me write 6 and 2. So we can finish up the top problem by writing plus 6 and plus 2. And that piece by the x, the t cubed. If we now put in t cubed, it will work. Except the first t cubed you can't read. Oh, well, that's not there anymore. So the final answer is 8 plus 6t cubed times x plus 2t cubed. Remove the t cubed and the t cubed squared, which is t to the 6th. Remove them, factor what remains, and then put back the t cubes. So, if you have, say, x squared minus 6x square root of y, or 6y square root of x, the order doesn't matter, minus 40y. So, you have x squared, so you think the only variable should be x. So let me put the square back so you see it. You think the only variable should be x. But it isn't, you see y's. So then, well, there's the x squared and there's the x term, and we'll call that the constant. By the x term, you have the square root of y. And you ask yourself, if I square it, what do I get? The answer is you get y back, which is right there. So now, since the extra piece by the x term, when you square that, it's by the y term, by the constant term, you can remove it temporarily. You can say, you know what, I'm just going to remove it. I'm just going to factor that. 6x squared minus 6x minus 40. And the factor x squared minus 6x minus 40. And the product should be negative 40. That is, the numbers are going to have different signs. And when I add them, I should get negative. That is, a larger number than I have a negative. And I'm looking for a sum of 6, negative 6, excuse me. 1 and negative 40, 2 and negative 20. 3 doesn't go in, but 4 goes in. Positive 4 goes in negative 10 times. And these numbers add up to 6, negative 6. Plus 4 and negative 10. They add up to negative 6, which is correct, and they multiply out to negative 40. So now I come to the line above, and I write down just what I have down here, and then I stick in this by those numbers, the 4 and the negative 10. I plug in square root of y. Okay, this finishes factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient is the number 1. Next section, obviously, the coefficient will not be negative 1.